before we dive into this conversation, I'd like to take a moment to share my personal connection to today's topic. As a daughter of immigrant parents from Chihuahua, Mexico, this topic is profoundly personal to me. I straddled the line between two worlds, just like many of you. Feeling enough has been a journey, a struggle, and ultimately a triumph. And it's a journey, though. It's some days it's a triumph, some days it's not. But I think we all share may share some of those feelings to mine. So as a Mexican American, I was never Mexican enough to live in Mexico, and I was never American enough to be in the United States. So it's definitely something that has been a challenge. So needless to say, it's such an honor to be here and to be here with our speaker today. So without further ado, welcome, Sahej. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here and to be talking to you about this topic that I am so passionate about.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's get started. Could you share a bit about your background and what inspired you to focus on bicultural and multicultural identities and mental health?
Yeah. So as you said, I come from a journalism and media background. I decided to become a therapist in my 30s. And in doing so, I knew that in making that transition, I wanted to stay in media to some degree. So that's when I started Brown Girl Therapy. It's been about 4.5 years now since I started that platform. And I think for me, part of my mission to start that platform was because I was seeing, or I hadn't seen actually, the child of immigrant kind of identifier talked about really openly in the mental health spaces. When I did market research, I found a lot of mental health pages for people of color or for specific racial groups. I found a lot of Asian American communities that felt really empowering and great, but they weren't often talking about specific bicultural issues. And so I think with deciding to become a therapist, my passion and background as a writer, and then going through graduate school where I was taught from a often Eurocentric and Western lens of what mental health looks like, what it means to be well, what it means to be healthy in our relationships and in our workplaces, I realized that there was a conversation that was missing. And that conversation was culture, was where does culture play into our understanding of what it means to be well, of what it means to work and exist and love and live and feel happy in our day-to-day lives. And so through building Brown Girl Therapy, I think one thing kind of led to another. I initially started it for personal reasons. I am the first in my family to be born in the West. I'm the first in my family to go to therapy. I'm the first in my family to marry outside of race and religion. And so I think there's a lot of personal, tie to this content. Like you said, the passion runs deep for me. It's me. It's child me knowing that I felt so alone, that I didn't have people to talk to about the cultural straddling that I was doing and didn't know was happening, right? It was the conversations with my parents that I didn't realize were normal for so many of us who are straddling cultures. It was the not enoughness that I felt. And so there's a part of me healing a younger version of me by doing this work. But through the years, I've just get messages upon messages from people saying that this is not something they ever saw. Having the language to talk about our experiences is so important. And even though I started it initially for the South Asian community, I have polled the community recently, and over 100 countries are represented. So that tells me that while we're not a monolith, right, as immigrants, as children of immigrants, as Asian Americans, et cetera, there is so much overlap in our experiences of straddling cultures and what that feels like and how that really impacts our day-to-day. So I just feel really passionate about serving this population that is historically and still very underserved, very underrepresented in the mental health field. And that's how I've gotten to where I am today.
That's amazing, and so grateful for you to have gotten to where you are today, because I have to say, going through therapy myself, and even going through the different challenges, first generation, adult learner, all of those challenges, and you're trying to take bits and pieces of the different cultures that you're in between and frustrated. But actually, when I came across your work a few years ago, I was able to articulate and get language to that feeling of frustration that I'm not fully understood, no matter how much I explain, like, no, I think differently than my parents. I think differently than even my cousins or peers that are raised in Mexico, and then my peers that are in Utah. It provided language for that. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And I think so many can relate and talk about that intersectionality of identities, different aspects, that there's always a piece that you're never feeling enough because you're straddling in between. So thank you. So can you delve in deeper into the concept of bicultural and multicultural identity? What are some prevalent challenges that individuals encounter when navigating between two cultures?
Yeah, so we learn a lot in school about racial identity development, right? So there are different identity development models for being biracial, for even white identity development, for being a person of color. And a lot of my curiosity and passion is, what does it mean to grow up bicultural? Where are we learning how to engage with ourselves and our sense of self as someone who is both and either or, right? Because we all kind of swing between feeling not enough of this or that and realizing that we are both of these things. And so when I think about bicultural and multicultural identity development, it's important to talk about how it's shaped from growing up, right? So we've got acculturation and this adaptation of multiple cultures that's happening in our own families, either through our parents who are immigrants or refugees, or our grandparents who are refugees or immigrants, right? So we are being taught how to adapt and live between two cultures from the people before us, or as the first, if you are an immigrant and the first in your family. And then we have geographical location, where you end up in the West, or how much access you have to your cultural community, to your language, to your family, to your origin country. And then we have to think about peer groups, right? So I like to walk people through these three systems that kind of shape your identity development. And they're your peer groups. How often did you see yourself represented in your peers? What experiences did you have growing up that made you feel pride or shame for where you come from because of peer experiences? Even now in your workspaces, how diverse are they? How often do you feel yourself being one of only or one of many in these spaces? And then thinking about your family system. So what were you taught growing up, right? We've got immigrant families who encourage assimilation because that's a survival mechanism. And then we have immigrant families who are discouraging assimilation because they want to retain their culture. They don't want you to become too American or become too Western in that way. So thinking about those experiences and how that shaped your relationship to both of your cultures, or any of your cultures that you hold. And then thinking about your systems of socialization, right? Did you have access to your language in schools? Were your holidays represented? Were you made fun of for eating cultural foods? Did you have access to religious or cultural communities or camps or things that reflected where your family comes from? All of these things impact the ways that you feel like you have created a sense of self, and how comfortable you are owning and standing and rooting into your different cultural identities. So this varies from person to person because none of us have the same experiences. None of us have been taught the same things. And so that's where we're not a monolith, and our bicultural identity development is impacted by many different things. In a specific way, this is a little oversimplified, but when I think about different cultures, I can really explain it from individualism to collectivism. And that's a very simplified way to talk about it. But when you think about individualism and collectivism, neither is worse or better than the other, right? But they are diametrically opposing when it comes to values and norms and expectations. So examples are, in one culture, you might be taught to take care of yourself and encouraged to take care of yourself at the expense of other people. And then in another culture, you might be encouraged to take care of other people, put others first at the expense of yourself. Or in one culture, you might be taught to be assertive, to speak up, to self-advocate. And in another culture, you might be taught to stay silent, to process, to take your time before responding. And so if we think about some of these simplified examples of how culture is showing up on a day-to-day basis, of course, it's going to make someone who is straddling these multiple streams of culture to feel like they're not enough because they're not acting the way that they're supposed to in one environment, or they feel like they have to adopt performative behaviors to fit in to that environment. And there are many other ways that, you know, being bicultural or multicultural can impact you. There are communication styles. There are the ways mental health symptomatically surfaces for you. There's language and the ways that you can even talk about emotional expression or wellness. There's hierarchy, right? In some families and cultures, you might be taught that there's unilateral respect going up based off birth order or gender. And in another culture, it might be normal for you to speak up and correct someone elder than you. And so we have to think about these things and how on a day-to-day basis, many of us who identify with more than one culture are always thinking and rethinking, how do I show up in this space? How do I show up in this relationship? What does it mean to be authentic? And so it's kind of an ongoing journey, and it's important to reflect in order to root into where you have gotten on your development journey, and then be mindful of it as you move forward. And it's a lifelong journey for sure.
It really is. And you were giving these different examples, and I feel like you're looking into what my experience is every day. And am I doing this right? Am I taking care of my parents right? And am I doing enough? And so exploring on that theme of feeling enough, and you already spoke a little bit about it, but could you elaborate on the significance of reshaping these narratives, and how is it that it can empower individuals?
Yeah, you know, there are a few questions I like to ask people, and I think for so many immigrants and children of immigrants, we have adopted definitions of what it means to be enough, and I think not enough of us, a play on words, but not enough of us have actually questioned where those definitions come from. So I like to ask people, whose cultural definitions and expectations are you living by? You know, is it your parent? Is it systemic? Is it your bosses? Is it, you know, a partners, a friends, right? In different environments, whose cultural definitions and expectations are you living by? And in that vein, whom are you seeking validation from? Because often when we don't feel enough, that is telling us that we are trying to fit something that may not feel authentic to us, or we're too scared to show to other people. So that begs the question of, where are we seeking this validation? Are we giving it to ourselves? What does it mean to be enough for ourselves? And at what point will you know that you're culturally enough? I think that's a really hard question for people to answer, because it's like, I don't know. I don't know at what point I'll know. But often people who don't feel enough are unable to articulate the tangible goal for what enoughness looks like. And the truth is, that might be because you're setting unrealistic expectations, or you are trying to hit the moving targets of someone else's definition of what enough looks like. That feeds imposter syndrome and self-doubt and unworthiness. And so I think it's really important for people to sit and reflect on those questions, and to really question which values, which norms serve you or cost you. How do they help you, or how do they harm you? And what's at stake for you to uphold certain values and definitions and expectations. Many people who come to this country and have maybe minimal support, or live in communities that are marginalized, don't feel like they have the privilege to be able to explore enoughness, because maybe they are in survival mode or seeking safety. And those are really valid experiences. And even if you're not, any generation to generation. So I think it's really important for people to consider where these cultural values come from, whose definitions they are, how they benefit you. And that's how you can then reshape and redefine these narratives for yourself and feel a sense of agency.
That is so great and so true. And you know, being able to feel empowered to own the richness that comes with those differences, and really reminding yourself of it. And there's a question here that I wanted us to go into. And so I'm a professor in adult education and teach many individuals who have just immigrated to the US and are trying to make their way through the education system, learn the language, and figure out how to make the best situation for themselves and sometimes a family. What is something I can do to make this journey easier for them?
That's a great question. And, this kind of ties into what is known as psychological safety and being able to create an environment that is culturally inclusive for your students. And so that can be just on a micro level of paying attention and asking a lot of questions about how they're doing and what their needs are. This can also be on a macro level of understanding some of these Eurocentric values we all subscribe to in the West, right? Professionalism doesn't have to look a certain way to be professionalism, or individualism isn't always the goal for people, or a sense of urgency and perfectionism are values that can be encouraged in Western systems, but aren't always available for people who are learning the language or starting out. So there should be a lot of reflection that comes first to identifying your own biases, figuring out how you can create culturally inclusive space by asking questions, being open to receiving and accessing avenues and feedback in all ways, right? Having norms for how things are handled, explicitly showing that value and appreciation. And I think these are the community and relationship ways that we can create a sense of cultural inclusiveness that I think a lot of people forget about. I think many people come to me and they're like, there's nothing I can do because I'm one person. How am I supposed to have any kind of agency over how someone else feels? When in reality, it's like, go to the basics, right? Show that empathy, show that curiosity, figure out what your role is. Where do you have power? What's the power differential in the relationship? What does it look like for you to be transparent, to be honest, to be communicative? It's not about being perfect. It's about being present. And that's how we can help other people who might be starting off, is being able to be aware of those community-based needs that we often think we can't be responsible for or don't have any say in. When in reality, if you are a teacher, you are a part of that. You are a part of that community for that person and what that person's experience is.
If I can even just add on that, a couple of years ago, I went to volunteer to an elementary school, and I was reading in the first grade class, reading them a book. And as I introduced myself with Sarai Lopez and gave them a little bit of background, I had a little girl come up to me and ask me if it was okay for her to speak Spanish, and because she's been made fun of. And so she didn't tell anyone that she spoke Spanish, but at home, that's all they did. They spoke Spanish. And so it just hit home. And even talking about classroom and teachers being able to embrace the diversity, being able to teach children that what they bring to the table is incredible. And then the simple ability to speak more than one language at that age is incredible. And even talk about representation, it matters where they can see individuals in other spaces and owning that multicultural identity. It's so important. It's so impactful.
It's so important. And I think, to that point, it's important for people to question what normal is to them, right? That's where we can do the work for ourselves to say, just because something's normal to you or is represented in dominant society doesn't mean that it's normal for someone else or representative of what their experience or needs are. And I think it's really important for people to consider that, to consider how you can create more opportunities for people to express themselves, like you said, whether it's in another language or it's through different means of expression, rather than just thinking, direct communication is the way to go, or speaking English is the way to go, or there's only one right way to be in community or conversation with another person.
That is so, so true. And so actually, let's go into a couple other questions here that I think go along with this. What generational differences have you discovered specifically, and how should stakeholders better support adults versus children?
Yeah, so it's interesting because a lot of the work I do is with children of immigrants. And when I say that, people think I work with kids like under age 18, but I really work with that. Being a child of immigrant identifier or experience is a forever thing. So a lot of my clients and a lot of the work I do is with adult children of immigrants. In terms of the generational differences, right, we have to think about generational experiences of our elders and our parents, because that shapes the way that we were raised and the narratives that we internalize about who we are and how we can be well and what it means to engage with others or how we're perceived by other people. And so when we think about immigrants, think about, their immigration and migratory loss and trauma. Think about their acculturation and experiences and narratives around assimilation. So when I think about my dad, who's an Indian immigrant, right, I will take in the whole context of him being allowed to enter this country because of the Civil Rights Act and because of all of the freedom fighters and Black activists who were fighting. That is what led to those immigration laws being repealed to allow more Asians into this country. And so I have to think about the systemic aspect of what his experiences were and what it meant for him, because what it did mean for him was that he needs to be of value. He needs to serve the economy. He needs to prove his worth. My dad's also a turban wearing man. So thinking about all of his discriminatory and experiences with racism and bullying that he's experienced and how that impacted him. So thinking about our parents and the immigrants' experiences is really important. They are often coming to a new country without social support or without the systems that they had in place, whether it's social capital, it's their family, it's just knowing the social and cultural norms, right? Speaking the language, having access to things. So there's a level of cultural bereavement there. Research suggests that immigrants are often navigating increase in marital conflict when they move here, and that can lead to a lot of intergenerational conflict between parents and their kids. Economic security and sacrifice and security is often the narrative that's wrapped around the immigrant journey. So if you take those things, then we think about the second generation immigrant, and that is dealing with the intergenerational trauma and grief that may or may not have been processed or acknowledged yet from our elders, the cultural imposter syndrome that we've been talking about of not feeling enough, the role reversal and parentification of children. So I hear from a lot of children of immigrants who said, oh, I have always, been the one to teach my parents English, or I have to do the bills, or I have to pick up the phone, or I have to translate for them, or I have to do things that are more adult-like roles as a kid because that is what I needed to do to support the family. And that's how the family survived. That's not necessarily a bad thing when you're doing it for the sake of your family surviving in a new country. But for a kid, that parentification develops into people pleasing, into perfectionism, into feeling like you always need to be of service. And then we can take the opposite, or not opposite, the different narrative for second gen immigrants, and that is privilege and emotional security and passion. So when we take economic security and sacrifice, and then we take emotional security and passion, those are sometimes butting heads, right? So I see children of immigrants who have more opportunities, have more resources, have more access to tools and skills and emotional freedom to be able to explore what their needs are, what they want, what they want to pursue as their career or as their life partner. And that can often butt heads with what their parents want for them, because their parents may still be stuck in survival mode or, survival mindset. So thinking about those generational differences and how the experiences that people live through, how that's passed down, but also how that impacts the way that they think about the world. A lot of children of immigrants come to me and say, how do I get my parents to understand that this great creative career I want to do, or this person I want to marry, even though it might not be someone that they would choose for me, is good for me? And that's a difference in values. And so exploring those difference in values, exploring what you have shared, what you share with your parents to address the differences, right? So maybe your parents are scared that you won't be secure when you're older with that career. Maybe they're worried of cultural erasure if you marry someone outside your race or religion. So addressing those fears are a really good way for kids to navigate, or stakeholders to help kids navigate those conversations that are really difficult and really hard. Often what's happening is it's a parallel process. Kids want to feel heard and seen, parents want to feel heard and seen, and we have to find a way to have both of them recognize that they both want the same thing. And if they can both give it to each other, then they'll both get the same thing. And so ultimately that's kind of the solution and the goal that we want to work toward.
This resonates so much, and I just want to unpack so much with you and have my own therapy session at this webinar. But I have to say, even when it comes to this, having to be the parent and translating as a child, translating for my parents still to this day, and there's that aspect sometimes that jumps in of resentment of not having had the opportunity to even experience what my own life would be. And but then you start exploring and you start diving in deeper, in resentment towards parents of, well, you should be speaking English by now, you should be taking advantage of all these different opportunities. And that's where sometimes having to stop and realize, like, the American dream for them is different than what the American dream is for me.
Yes.
And so even knowing just the fact that their children live in the United States is the American dream. And that alone is an incredible accomplishment, and being able to sit with that and be okay with it's a journey. And so talking about just the generational differences, and also the guilt of success, the guilt of surviving, the guilt of having an education, of the guilt of having the privilege to be in a country like this. What could you share some insight into how this impacts mental health? How can individuals address and manage this sense of guilt effectively?
Yes, yeah, guilt is the biggest issue I see when it comes to bicultural experiences, because of that not enoughness, and often the feeling that we're doing something wrong all the time. It's interesting because there's no roadmap, like you said, right? Your parents' American dream is different than your American dream. And often our parents or immigrants or refugees don't have a roadmap for what they're experiencing or navigating. And in the same way, we don't have a roadmap for being the first to be socialized and grow up in the West either. And so again, it's a parallel process that's happening, and it's trying to find that common ground that's really important. But yes, there's so much guilt, and that guilt is often really tied to gratitude. So the expectation that we should be thankful, the expectation that we should be grateful. And I'm not saying that's not the case. You know, we should show appreciation and gratitude, and it's okay for us to struggle too. I think many children of immigrants and immigrants feel like they're so privileged, and it feels trivial in comparison with maybe what their ancestors or their elders had endured to struggle or to have access to things, right? I get questions from people saying, well, how do I watch what's going on abroad when things are hard for me? Or how can I go to therapy or complain about what's the small thing at work when my parents went through the partition or my grandparents lived through war? So it's often this comparison mindset. But what we really need to do is to understand that that hurt and pain and suffering are not a comparison. Both things can be true at the same time. Your parents could have lived through X, Y, and Z, and you can be struggling. We need to challenge that binary mindset that only one thing is more important or one thing can be true and that's it. Because that, if we start to think that, then we will force ourselves to struggle in silence. We will disallow intimacy and connection. We will often be stuck in moments of tension and conflict internally because we don't know how to release it or work through it. And so it's really important for the guilt, for when you're feeling guilt, to remember a couple things. That guilt is not a bad thing, right? As an emotion, it is often telling you that it's alerting you to your morality. It's alerting you to the fact that you might have caused pain or hurt to someone. However, unhelpful guilt, chronic guilt, is when we just constantly feel like we're not meeting the social and cultural standards that have been placed on us. And so we are always feeling guilty. We are always feeling like we're not doing enough, that we are not enough, that we are wrong. And that can translate to shame, where we start to feel wrong. We start to feel bad. I'm a bad daughter. I'm a bad kid. I'm a bad granddaughter. I'm a bad Indian. I'm a bad Indian American. Like the cycle of self-talk will just keep going and going. And it all starts with that guilt if we don't know how to acknowledge and address that guilt. So we want to address, the other feelings that might be coming up for us that are associated with the guilt. Is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it hurt? Is it resentment? Like you said, whose guilt is it? Sometimes we get guilt tripped and we get given guilt by our parents, by other people, and we absorb it, we adopt it, and we take it as if it's ours. So sometimes we have to parse out, why do I feel guilty? What's making me feel guilty? What is this guilt trying to tell me right now? And is it something that means I should change and amend a behavior? Or is it something that isn't aligned with my personal values, and therefore it's okay for me to move forward and I shouldn't feel guilty? And so I think that it's really hard work, but it requires a lot of self-awareness and self-exploration to get clear on your values and understand why that guilt is coming up and where it might be rooted. Oftentimes that involves a level of differentiation that is really hard for people in immigrant families, because there tends to be this expectation of enmeshment where everyone is kind of adopting each other's feelings and adopting each other's thoughts and, acting as one being in one system. So differentiation can be really difficult because it requires you to acknowledge, are my values different? Are my passions different? Are my needs different? And is that okay? And how do I give that to myself? How do I honor who I am and what I need while maintaining these relationships with the people that I love? Feelings are not necessarily fact, right? Like that's something people often tend to forget. I feel guilty, therefore I'm doing something wrong. When in reality, feelings are not fact. I'm feeling guilty. Let me take a minute and sit with it and think about what it's trying to tell me. And so it's really important to take those pauses and to listen to what we're thinking and what we're feeling and address it, with time rather than just reacting to it, because that's often what I see happening.
That's so true. And would you say, do you think that perhaps even adding on to this generational guilt and to the survival aspect, do you believe that historical racial tension in the West make it difficult and adds on to even not feeling enough and not being culturally validated?
Absolutely. It's all multi-layered, right? We can't talk about the ways we feel as individuals, especially if we are part of cultures or groups that are marginalized, without talking about the history of what that marginalization and the group's experiences have been, because they're all related. Whether it's passed down through intergenerational trauma and narratives, whether it's passed down through intergenerational resilience and strength, whether it's passed down through the ways we interact now, presently, with our loved ones and at work, and it's often how we come to understand who we are as people, right? We come to understand who we are because we're often told stories about who we are, either through systems, through history, through our families, through our cultures. And that is all related, in my opinion. We can't talk about people and individuals without talking about the groups and the history of them.
That's absolutely true, and embracing it, not avoiding the conversations. So on that, and being able to create psychologically safe environments is definitely crucial for organizations, and especially with our society today, with it being so culturally complex. What are practical approaches that organizations and leaders can adopt to foster psychological safety, especially for those dealing with multicultural identity challenges? Are there specific strategies that have proven effective in your experience?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the question I got about the educator. So, creating psychologically safe spaces is an everyone issue and that everyone needs to be involved in it in order to be a part of the solution. And so if you are a person in a position of power, if you are a company, it really is a top-down approach, right? If we're not seeing the people in power, the people in authority, the people at the top of these companies caring about creating culturally inclusive spaces, then it's going to be really hard for those micromanagers, the people toward, the middle people, or the people at the, who are new to these environments, to feel like anyone cares about them. So it really is a top-down approach in that way. And a part of creating those psychologically safe spaces is to make sure that managers are trained well, is having these types of trainings and these educational moments for people to learn and to do the work for themselves, because we show up as we are. And if we haven't done the work to address our own biases, our own assumptions, our own norms, and we don't question them, then we're not going to question it when we're with people. And that might be more reason for why others around us are experiencing micro invalidations or microaggressions or not feeling safe, right? We don't get to decide who feels safe for us. People experiencing psychological safety get to be the ones to decide if they feel safe in a relationship or an environment. All we can do is to do the work on ourselves to make sure that we're not perpetuating harm. And that is how we can start to create safety. There are definitely specific behaviors managers and companies can take. They can prioritize this kind of content and education and learning year round, right? Instead of it being just in May, we care about Asian Americans or mental health, have it year round, have these conversations be ongoing. Allyship and having company action should not be reactive. It should be proactive. If it is reactive, then it doesn't feel authentic or meaningful. Only when it's proactive and we are incorporating this into the thread of our company culture does it feel like we belong or we can feel safe in these environments. Think about how different people communicate and how they share their ideas and their needs. And even then get curious and ask people, hey, I want to have a meeting with you for our one-on-one. What's the best way to do that? Do you want to just schedule a meeting next week, or would it be easier for you to go over an agenda and you can sit with that? Would you rather me email you and tell you some of my points? Like, we have to think about different ways that people communicate, because it's not all direct, it's not all explicit. Culturally, we all learn how to communicate differently. By embracing other people's and celebrating the diversity of people's thought and experiences and backgrounds, that's another way that we will create psychologically safe spaces. Recognizing that we as people in power have to think outside the box to incorporate inclusion and tolerance and acceptance of people is how people will feel comfortable showing up. We have to keep in mind that inclusion and assimilation are not the same thing, right? Assimilation is when there's a high belongingness in an environment, but people aren't encouraged to bring their whole selves to that environment. Whereas inclusion is when there's a high belongingness in the culture and people feel comfortable bringing their whole selves to that environment. So that means their unique backgrounds, their unique voices, their unique sense of self. If we are telling people, oh, you can belong if you act X, Y, and Z, then we're not making them feel included. We're making them feel like they have to perform and adopt certain behaviors to feel a sense of belonging. So we really have to question the ways that we are thinking of inclusion, the ways that we are thinking of culture, and the values that we are upholding within our systems. I also think it's important to think about on a macro level, the assessments, the evaluations, all of these things that we use to decide how someone is deemed professional or smart or progressing, right? These are not all culturally inclusive. So thinking about the language choice you're using, what are your metrics for judging someone else in the workplace? And how is it actually harmful and causing people to stay stuck in their positions or not move up, right? We know Asian Americans are the least likely to be seen in positions of power. Women of color are least likely to be seen in positions of power. So what is it that the companies are or aren't doing to create these psychologically safe and environments and relationships where people can get access to those skills, those tools, those opportunities? I think I answered your question. I kind of went on a tangent because I feel like I'm so passionate about this, and I talk about this in corporate environments all the time. But yes, there's just a lot of reflective work people need to do to really address some of these issues.
I couldn't agree more. I'm so glad you did go expand more on that, because it's something so needed. And I really appreciated your comment about there's a difference of assimilating when there's a huge drive towards belonging. And we've seen that in the past few years across companies, across organizations in the United States, where there's been this push of embracing diversity and inclusion, and let's cultivate belonging, and the focus has been very much that. And oftentimes we oversee, are we accepting the authentic self? And what does that look like? So in your opinion, how can we measure the success of initiatives aimed to empowering individuals, aimed to empowering authenticity in their pursuit of feeling enough within their multicultural identities, and just as a whole, how can we measure it?
As individuals or as people who are trying
As
to,
an organization,
yeah.
as leaders implementing different initiatives?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, as I said, continuously keeping managers accountable and checking in, right? In so many institutions, people move into managerial positions just as a next step, rather than actually getting the training or the understanding of what it means to be a people manager. It's a position of privilege and power that should not be taken lightly. And I say this too in all my corporate environments. If you are a manager, you should be taking that position very seriously, because you are responsible for the ways people feel in the workplace, for the ways that you interact, and doing your own work on, DEI and inclusion and your own biases and assumptions. And so I think it's important to have those trainings. I also think it's important for, as companies, to conduct regular pulse polling among managers, so you can identify workplace problems, team problems, you can address them immediately, you can work together, managers can have that level of support for addressing these issues. Having transparency both in a top-down approach, but also on the managerial level, and just for teams, right? When possible, include the entire team, include all your managers, include everyone in important conversations. When you do that, people feel more of a stake and a responsibility and a participation in the company, in being a part of it, right? Instead of just telling people these are the decisions being made, I'm not going to share how we got here. So having that level of transparency is really important. Collecting granular data is imperative. A lot of the work I do is for Asian Americans in the workforce, and it's important to recognize that when we group people by their races, we are not seeing them as whole individuals in their intersectional identities of race, gender, sexuality. So it's really helpful for companies to get granular data about workers across all of these identities. Then you can see what are the levels of retention, what are the levels of promotion, what are the levels of hiring here, and what can we do to evaluate these practices that we have. So those are some of the ways that I think are more concrete for companies to think about when actually measuring the success of being more inclusive in their workforce.
I agree. I think especially with working within areas of diversity and inclusion, I think it's often dismissed the value that data can bring to us. Sometimes initiatives of diversity, it's the feel-good conversations, but that's not what would bring value. Let's see who's here. Let's talk about, let's identify what's making a difference for them. And that's where we can really leverage that information. So actually, let's go into, we have a question here, and I think it's a really good question from Dr. Moon, Dr. Cliff Moon. He recently had a dinner with the author of Children of the Land, Marcelo Hernandez Castillo. As an undocumented high school student, he adopted the threshold of invisibility because of the hidden and unhidden rules that his ethnicity, cultural background was a marker of the animosity directed at immigrant students from Mexico. He suffered socially and emotionally. Can you speak to the threshold of invisibility?
This is actually the first time I'm hearing that term, which is important to me, because then that means I want to do this work. And I saw that Dr. Moon also recommended this book, so I'm going to definitely be adding it. When it comes to what I know about levels of invisibility that people feel, oftentimes it's twofold. The first is that often people will feel like they can't, being more visible will relate to more levels of harm. And I think to that, what I want to say is, one question I get the most related to this is, people say, how can I be more authentic in workspaces? And I think that that is people saying, there are parts of me that are invisible. There are parts of me that I'm scared to show. There are parts of me that I'm scared to show because of levels of harm I might have to endure by being more honest and authentic. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's what the threshold of invisibility might be talking about. And I think it's important to recognize that it's okay if you don't feel authentic in every space you're in. And what I mean by that is, I have a love-hate relationship with the word authenticity, because oftentimes systems are not built for certain people. And by telling people, just be authentic, just show up, just be yourself, we're actually putting them in a line of danger, because they might get more harmed by being authentic in spaces that aren't set up to include them or to consider them. And so I think it's important, as individuals who feel like you're struggling with that, you want to consider what your values are and what are parts of you that you can show that feel authentic. It's okay if it's not the whole you, but you also don't want to present a false self. So thinking about the ways that you can incorporate some of your authentic self into different environments can help you feel a sense of agency while protecting yourself. Because I think I would be remiss if I said, just go for it, right? Because I don't think there are systems or spaces where it is safe for people to show up authentically. And if I totally misunderstood the threshold of invisibility, then that's on me, and I'm going to do my learning after this. But that's what I took from that question.
I think you were spot on. So thank you. And so actually, as we're coming to an end for this webinar, how can individuals participating and joined us today, or who will watch this later on, how can they actively contribute to promoting multicultural understanding and psychological safety in their own communities and workplaces?
Be curious. The first thing is, it's okay if you don't know everything right now. It's okay if you're learning. It's okay to be honest about where you are on your journey, right? It's not about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about being curious. Do the work on yourself to address some of those biases and assumptions, to educate yourself. There are so many resources now with just the internet, right? To learn, to hear other people's stories, to put other people first, to be curious, and to educate yourself on certain issues. Don't assume that everyone from the same group is a monolith or has the same experiences. That sense of curiosity needs to extend to every single person. As a therapist, I often get clients who are like, I'm South Asian too, or I'm a child of immigrants too, and working with you, I know you're just going to get it. And I have to often be like, yes, maybe. And I have to be curious about your experiences, because I never want to assume that my experiences are your experiences. Just because we share in an identity, or just because I look or sound like someone else, doesn't mean my experience is exactly the same. So always having that level of curiosity in your day-to-day interactions is key. And then I can never say this enough times, allyship is proactive, not reactive. By doing this work today, tomorrow, every day, incorporating something into your life where you're showing curiosity, learning, trying to be a better person who is more inclusive in these spaces, that is how we actually create sustainable and intersectional allyship. It's not about just being reacting when something happens in the news or something happens at work. So really being mindful of that and doing the hard work. This is hard work. It's difficult, it's uncomfortable, and that's okay. But lean into that and build those skills to tolerate the discomfort and to really build more inclusivity. It's uncomfortable for a reason, and we really don't want to shy away from that.
Yes, and yes, and yes. And you can see all the hands and everything. I think everyone agrees with you. And even just the power of allyship, the power that it brings to feeling seen and feeling heard. You may not understand what that individual is going through, but if you can just help them feel safe and heard. That's just absolutely incredible. And just really quick, do you recommend any specific resources or initiatives for those interested in furthering their knowledge on these topics after this session? Of course, everyone her book's coming out, and I push that enough because I'm personally excited about it. But please, do you have any other resources that you want to recommend?
Yes, I'm certainly not the only one talking and writing about this, but I will say that my book will encompass a lot of personal and individual and systemic and workplace issues when it comes to culture and mental health and inclusivity. So there's that. I have my newsletter too, which tackles more specific research. And then I would say, when it comes to the workplace, at least, the Pew Research Center and McKinsey and Co. are really great with having up-to-date surveys and information on different groups of people and what they're experiencing in real time. I find that the Pew Research Center is really great at having resources if you're looking to learn more about a certain group, if you're looking to actually get the stats and data for what people are experiencing. Those tend to be my go-to. Otherwise, if you are in a place of work and you are a manager or work or in an ERG or have some kind of level of influence where you know other people, crowdsourcing these. There's so many TED Talks, there's so many YouTube videos, there's so many newsletters, and people who are like me who may not have the certain level of platform, but like are writing and talking and researching this, right? I just think once we ask that questions, just crowdsource, and you will find a plethora of resources to help you on your journey. Of course, there are tons of anti-racist and anti-discriminatory trainings that you can find online that I just want to if you Google it, you'll find it. Always, we can do this work ourselves in so many ways. It doesn't require us having other people telling us what we need to do in order to be curious and actually do this work and be more inclusive and more curious folks. So, yeah.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. My goodness, this has been an incredible conversation. And I mean, I think you saw the chat, it was moving so quickly. It was just absolutely phenomenal. And we're so appreciative of your time and just the richness of today. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And I'll hand it over to my colleague, Tandra.
Thank you, Saray. Thank you both. This was so good. I posted a thank you in the chat to everyone who has been participating with us today. I know that there were some questions that we weren't able to get to. I sincerely apologize. There's only so much we can fit into 1 hour. This was such a great discussion. I hope that you all received as much from it as I did. We did post some of the information in the chat so that you're able to purchase Sahaj's book and subscribe to the newsletter. I'd recommend subscribing to the newsletter right now as I'm chatting. Go to that link and get subscribed, because there were those questions and those things that I know that you all want to learn and hear more about. That's where you can go to get that information while you're waiting for the book that you're going